That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Contact light. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
A stunning symbol of human ambition and achievement. 50 years ago this week, the Apollo 11 crew of Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins blasted off from what was then known as Cape Kennedy in Florida. Now, my next guest calls the Apollo 11 mission one of the most prominent achievements of humankind. David Whitehouse is the author of Apollo 11, The Inside Story, and he joins us now from London, England. David, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
So you were 13 years old when you watched the moon landing on TV. What sort of impact did that have on you?
I've never gotten over that night. I was keen on space and astronomy beforehand because I was living through the space race, the Mercury, Gemini and Apollo projects. But that particular night on a black and white television with low resolution, with only 3 channels, in what was a grim year in the United Kingdom in 1969, seeing those ghostly figures dance across the moon, put the first footstep onto the moon, is something that changed my life forever, and I think changed millions of lives, because where would the 20th century be without the Apollo 11 landing on the moon?
It is a good question, and certainly it has had such a huge impact on space exploration and on so many other individuals, of course, around the world who are watching this happen. But you also were lucky enough to, in fact, interview both Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. So what stuck out to you the most from those conversations?
Well, I was very lucky to be in space and astronomy when I did. And over several decades, I amassed interviews with all of the moonwalkers, indeed, everybody who went to the moon and didn't walk on the moon. So it said that astronauts are dull and you don't want them imaginative. That's far from the truth. They're a fascinating bunch of people. Neil Armstrong, reticent, cool under pressure, his feat of landing in the last 3 minutes of Apollo 11 is the greatest flying feat of aviation in history. And yet he bore that feat, that achievement, the most famous man in the world, with dignity, humility, and perhaps at times too much introspection. But he was the right person for the right job. Even though I found that astronauts were, when they came back to Earth, they always frequently didn't cope very well for a while till they got used to being back on Earth. What do you do? How do you cope when you've been to the moon and you come home?
You know, it's interesting because you got this incredible insight from speaking with Neil Armstrong himself as well. I wonder if you know how it was decided that Neil Armstrong would be the one of the team that is walking, in fact, on the moon. We know Michael Collins, for example, didn't get to do that.
No, he was the one who stayed in orbit, and had things gone wrong, and Armstrong and Aldrin were not able to come back or they'd crashed, he would have had the unenviable task of coming back on his own. But yes, when the crew was put together, Apollo 11 was put together, and it was announced that they would make the first landing, it wasn't initially clear who would be the first person to put the first footprint on the moon. And in some early drafts of the mission, it was Buzz Aldrin. However, as training went on, and they weren't the closest of teams, the Apollo 11 crew, NASA decided that it was Armstrong's call, and Armstrong would never get into an argument. And quietly one day, after Buzz had been perhaps assuming too much and a little bit too much in the face of other astronauts, said, "It's going to be me." And I think it took Buzz a while to get over that. Michael Collins said that he resented not being the first person to step on the moon, and perhaps he didn't appreciate then being the second.
And finally, as we head towards this 50th anniversary taking place tomorrow, I wonder if I can ask you what you think the legacy of that moment in history is going forward and has been already.
It's a time when we came closest as a species to achieving greatness as we have ever done. a time when the world came together. In 10,000 years' time, in 100,000 years' time, if we're here, this century will be remembered for perhaps DNA, nuclear power, and for the first footprint. The words of Armstrong will last far longer than the troubles and trials of our times. It's history, it's a mythological journey to an object that has been with us throughout our civilization, the greatest technical feat in humanity's history, and also a very personal journey as we now see these old astronauts look back on the triumphs of their youths.
It will be a day to mark and to remember that impressive mission. Thank you so much for your time today, David.
Welcome.
David Whitehouse is the author of Apollo 11, The Inside Story, and he joined us today from London.